Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Great to see some familiar faces and unfamiliar faces that hopefully will become familiar over the next hour to 2 hours or around the session tonight. So, welcome to the session entitled ROI, What Investors Want to See in the European ATMP Ecosystem. I'm Phil Vanek. I'm the CTO of Gamma Biosciences. We are a private equity investor in life sciences tools and technologies. My role here today is to step aside, be as quiet as possible, and let our panelists do most of the talking, but I will facilitate the discussion. Before we get started with those introductions, I wanted to make a couple housekeeping item announcements. We have 1 hour. We're going to divide the hour roughly into 3 sections, looking to the past couple of years and what's evolved and what's changed in the last 18 months to 2 years in the world economic environment. We'll look a little bit at the present situation and what investors are looking for, and then we'll look forward to the future. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. We will leave time for questions and answers, and my only ask there is that you please wait for the microphone. As this session is being recorded, it just makes it a lot easier for those who will view the presentation afterwards. We will be potentially making some forward-looking statements. We are not here to give investment advice. We are here to give our own personal opinions. So on behalf of Gamma Biosciences and our parent company, KKR, I'm not projecting or promising any future returns. We have a really fantastic panel of a variety of different backgrounds and geographies representing the EU and the UK and the ATMP community. So I'm going to ask each of them to go down the line and make a brief introduction, a little bit about their investment organization, portfolio, and who they are and their background, and we'll take it from there. Thanks. Geoffroy.
So good afternoon. I'm Geoffroy de Ribains. I'm managing partner with AdBio Partners. So my background is molecular biology, and I've been in life science venture capital for 12 years at Atlas and Andera before being a CEO of 2 companies. One is small molecule, and the latest one was a gene therapy company in ophthalmology. And then I joined AdBio. AdBio is a seed fund based in France and with offices here in Barcelona as well. So we are specialized in creating companies from academic research, and we bring to the projects our expertise, experience in creating companies, as we've all been on the other side in the management team. We have all experience in managing companies. And so we create these companies, and we bring capital and management and bring also other syndicates, so investors, to the board. So this is our, in a nutshell, what we do.
Great, thanks, Geoffroy. Lucia?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm a partner within Sofinnova Partners. Sofinnova Partners is a venture firm with 50 years of history investing mainly in Europe in life science and more recently in industrial biotech. We manage 2.5 billion, and we have different strategies that are filling in the different needs of companies from their creation to their growth and establishment up to the market. Specifically, I work within the Sofinnova Teleton Fund strategy, that is an early stage strategy focused on technology transfer, so really finding opportunities coming out from academia. We have a focus, geographical focus on Italy, and we have a particular interest in cell and gene therapy. In fact, we have a strategic partnership with Fondazione Teleton, that is an Italian charity funding research on genetic disorders. So I have been doing for most of my life technology transfer. I have a scientific background. And then I just moved at the end of 2018 in Sofinnova. And just talking about cell and gene therapy is a field in which Sofinnova is very much interested. We have 12 investments in the field. And out of the Sofinnova Teleton Fund, we closed 5 investments based on cell and gene therapy.
Great, thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Hodgkin. I'm a member of the team at Syncona, and also CEO of Resolution Therapeutics. Syncona, as you probably know, is a long-term balance sheet investor, originally founded about 10 years ago by the Wellcome Trust. And originally we had about 250 million pounds of the Wellcome Trust's capital. We then, via a merger with a public business, we became a publicly quoted investment fund on the London Stock Exchange. We now have in assets and cash a little bit less than £1.5 billion. We create and build and back companies with a view of taking products to market. So our goal is to create sustainable businesses. We invest off the balance sheet, which means that we can take a long-term view. And in fact, we think about reasons to keep our shareholding in companies rather than dispose of our shareholding in companies. And success for us would be to own a significant shareholding of a business that has successfully commercialized a product. My background, I'm a chemist originally, and prior to joining Syncona about 10 years ago, I've spent my whole career in drug development. I had a science career, and then I sort of had a business development, marketing, corporate career. Because of my background at Syncona, I play a strong operational role. So I'm involved in starting businesses, and then I jump into those businesses to make them operational. And among the projects I've worked on, I've started 2 cell therapy companies. The first one was Autolus, where I was the first CEO. And more recently, I started Resolution, where I'm also the CEO now. So that's me.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. So, hello, everyone. I'm Jordi Xiol. I'm a partner at Ysios Capital. We're a biotech VC. We're based here in Barcelona, but we invest globally. We manage a little bit over 400 million euros, and we've been in the cell and gene therapy space for quite a while. We have 3 AAV gene therapy companies in our portfolio. Those would be Sparing Vision, Splice Bio, and Vivet Therapeutics. We were also early investors in the cell therapy space. We invested in a company a long time ago called Tygenix, which developed one of the first cell therapy products to ever get approved in the EU. This was a product called Alofisel that was for fistulas in Crohn's disease patients, and the company got acquired by Takeda. And as for myself, I trained as a molecular biologist, spent many years in academic research. Then I started my VC career at Biosciences in the US, where I primarily focused on an investment we made in AdBio. This was the last private round before their acquisition by Bayer, and about 4 years ago, I joined Ysios.
Great, thanks. So to sort of set the table, I mentioned we were going to start looking backwards in the last 18 months to 2 years, and this is probably the only question I'll ask each of you to weigh in on. But I'd like to sort of get your own perspectives, both from your geographies, but also from your investment sort of focus. What has changed in the last 18 months to 2 years? Maybe notwithstanding COVID and all of that, but there's been a lot of economic uncertainty and change. Really love to get, has your viewpoint materially changed in the last 18 months to 2 years? And if so, how have we gotten to where we are today? Geoffroy, I'll start with you, and I'll move all the way down.
Yeah, so what we've seen with the COVID crisis is that there was a lot of funds being raised. This has allowed a lot of capital being influxed into the system. Like in France, there was 3 funds that have been raised over the last 2 years of more than 500 million or close to 500 million euros each. So that's really positive for the sector as a whole, because it's not only for France, but the whole Europe. And for us as a seed investor, we see that as a resource for our companies to be funded after we launch them. So that's quite interesting. The fact that the IPO market is down for the moment. We've seen previously US crossover coming to Europe and funding European companies. They are now gone. So there is less capital available for the later stage companies, so they have to rely more on their internal syndicates. So you see internal rounds. Companies have to be more resilient. But as I said, there is a lot of capital available, so I think we can make it through this tense market. So overall, I'm positive for the outlook. And I'll let my colleagues comment.
Great. Now, we'll certainly be diving deep into sort of the current state and the future, so we'll double click on that in just a bit. But Lucia, from your background, 18 months, what have you seen?
Well, I think that, again, by focusing on Italy, on the geography, there is a lot of new investors, Italian investors, that are growing. In general, Italy didn't have the same kind of crisis in terms of fundraising for funds, for investors in the past couple of years, but we were starting really low, so there was definitely a lot of room for improvement. But at the same time, this is a very positive thing because we are seeing finally investors that are, pass me the term, educated, so they know what they are investing in, they are professionals. And this is very important also for the startups that are created in the territory because the fact that there are educated investors is able to attract also international and US investors. So there is, generally speaking, a lot of expansion. The other very important thing, and they think that this is very much common through the European landscape, is that we are anyhow very attractive also for US investors because of the valuations of companies. We have not gone through in Europe those bubble times that have instead characterized very much US companies. So I would say that, there is a positive trend. Generally speaking, cell and gene therapy companies worldwide have raised much less in 2022 compared to 2021. We went down from 6 billion to 3 billion. So that was quite of a shortage. But still, in 2022, there were 11 deals worth more than 100 million. And in these first, I would say, 3 months, at least from a Biosciences survey, companies have been able to raise more than 500 million in the cell and gene therapy space. So there is still a lot of interest. So the message is, be positive.
Great. And Ed, your history goes back with Autolus and Resolution. So what have you seen over the last 2 years?
Well, what's happened is that we've been in a very long period of money being essentially free, and that's over. And with interest rates going up, now the cost of capital has gone up enormously. And it means that companies are finding it much harder to get financed. And of course, the way investors respond to that is, especially in a situation where we don't really know how long this will carry on, is to preserve their cash for their existing portfolio. Any investor will prioritize their existing portfolio over new investments. And so that means that fewer new companies will get funded, and it means fewer new syndicates will be formed. I think the good news, though, is, among funded, the companies that do get funded, I think good companies will still get funded. Because I think in the era of free money, that I sort of call it, a lot of companies that perhaps shouldn't have been funded have been funded. So I think good companies will always be funded. There'll be a focus as well on clinical stage assets. So I think the market now, the public markets in particular, will reward data. They will attribute value to data and not to narratives and ideas. So I think funding to clinical data is going to be the priority. And then the other thing, of course, which every investor thinks about is, historically, whenever we've been through a downturn, the investors that have done well are the ones that have come out of the downturn into the upturn in a strong position and have investments in companies that can then take off and do well when the money starts to flow again. And so I think the trick for an investor is going to be to sort of try and gauge how long we're in this downturn and then be ready to come out of it stronger when the upturn eventually comes. Of course, the tricky part is knowing when that's going to be. I think, I think overall I'm very optimistic, and I think that's because it's sort of always amazing how innovation surprises us on the kinds of improvements it can make to healthcare, and I think that will always be the case, and so there will always be these amazing breakthroughs that we will want to finance. So I think that's my sort of overall optimism.
Yeah, great. And Jordi, you're our local host city, or from our local host city, so perhaps you've got some context of what's been happening in Spain and beyond.
Right. I think if we take a step back and we go more like 5-10 years ago, I think we've seen, the biotech sector really go global. So from being very US-centric to having, important hubs in Europe, also in China. We've seen large biotech European companies emerge, companies like Argenx, companies like Genmab. Actelion was acquired as well for a high price tag. And so the European ecosystem has matured a lot in that last period, as Ed was saying, where there was a lot of liquidity. It was easy to fundraise. And that has led to a lot of consolidation here. And in particular in Spain, we've seen the biotech ecosystem grow a lot. So investment every year has been growing exponentially. Now, in the last 1 year or two, interest rates have really become the main driver of, the lack of investment, let's say. Of course, when you have low interest rates, in order to get a return, you need to invest in risky approaches, risky assets. So that's where, biotech was getting a lot of investment. As interest rates increase and you can invest in bonds, then, investment in risky approaches decreases. And I think we've seen, especially in sectors like cell and gene therapy, which are very, not only risky, but also very capital intensive, they've been particularly hit. If you take the biotech sector and other risk sectors like tech, fintech, different emerging areas that have all been hit very seriously. I think cell and gene therapy a little bit more even because of that additional requirement for capital. And that just basically means that, we need to adjust to this new situation. We still have a lot of good science coming out in this area. And basically we need to optimize the resources that we now have to get to those valuable inflection points that can really allow to prove the science and push the therapies forward in this new environment.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you for that. We're going to move forward now to sort of the present environment that we all find ourselves in. I know a number of folks in the audience who will probably have some burning questions about how to go about raising capital. But just to sort of bring it back to the topic of the ROI and what investors want to see for the title of the session, maybe deep dive a little bit into how do you define return on investment or ROI for your particular class and an area of focus. Jordi, I'll start with you just in
Sure. So we're a traditional VC in the sense that, we raise a fund from limited partners. It's a closed fund, so our latest fund has 215 million euros that we need to deploy. And then obviously, ROI in our case is driven by exits. So the fund has a lifetime of 10 years. Within those 10 years, we want to return the money back to our LPs and ideally provide a return as well. But that doesn't mean that, the way we define value is based on those exits. I think, when we approach an investment decision, we look at it in the sense of value for patients. I think, in the long run, value for patients and value for investors, we're lucky that in our sector that tends to converge. And so that's how we look at investment opportunities. And I think if we look at the gene therapy space, in particular cell therapy as well, if you see the largest acquisitions that there's been, companies like Avexis, right, for very large price tag, multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. In the end, they've also been the therapies that have provided the most value for patients, right? So gene therapy that is life-saving for babies that, had a, life expectancy of just a few years and now are living many, many years healthy. So that's how we think about value, even though, obviously we have to return capital to our investors.
Gotcha. And Geoffroy, similar thread, how is ROI sort of paramount for your company?
So we have, same objectives as Jordi and Ysios. We're exit-driven investors. But we have also, other ways to create value or, before getting the final cash exit M&A deal. We have an approach where we do early M&A deals for equity against our equity, and we've done that with 3 companies in our portfolio in the cell and gene therapy space, actually, where we found that this, for instance, we merged one of our companies with Sparring Vision, and we brought their second asset in the pipeline, and that was a way for us to increase the valuation in our books of our initial investments, but also to speed up the process and the project, and to increase the probability of success, because we would bring this project into a larger experienced team with a larger syndicate. So that's another way where we can create value in our portfolio before getting the cash exit in the end.
Great. And Ed, you mentioned in your introduction that you invest off the balance sheet, and that gives you some advantages in terms of time horizons and kind of what your priorities are. So I'd come to you and ask the same question. How do you differentiate your value creation?
I mean, it's worth going back to sort of the reason Syncona was set up originally, I think. So there was a history of very really cutting-edge European companies developing products and then being acquired at a point of, say, clinical proof of concept. They were acquired by a US company usually, and then you'd see this huge value creation going to the US and not staying in Europe. And there was a feeling, I think, at the Wellcome Trust, which was the institution that founded Syncona, that there should be some pool of capital that would be able to create sustainable businesses in Europe. And that was really the thinking behind the origin of Syncona. And of course, to be a 10-year venture fund isn't compatible with that. So the lifetime of the capital isn't compatible with the lifetime it takes, or the time it takes, to create a sustainable business. And so there had to be a different approach. And so right from the outset, Syncona was designed as a balance sheet investor. So to the extent that we sell a company, we can recycle that capital. It comes back to the balance sheet, and we can reinvest it. So we're actually, now that we're quoted on the London Stock Exchange as an investment company, we report NAV, the net asset value. So we calculate the value of all our portfolio. That's reported to the market quarterly, and then our stock price on the London Stock Exchange, traded stock, reflects the net asset value of our portfolio in cash. So that's how we're actually measured. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, our goal is to build businesses that will take products to market. And I mean, and that influences the kinds of companies that we invest in or create. Usually they have both a lead product that's defined, so we know what the lead product is, and we can chart its course to approval, and we can assess the chance that product will work. And then usually they also have a platform so that you can build a sustainable pipeline. And that, of course, that's the shape of a company that has a chance to make it all the way to commercial success. So in the past, we haven't really invested in single asset companies, for example. I think that strategy influences the kind of companies that we back.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. So, Lucia, I'm going to ask you the same question, but in a different way. Your organization is very patient-oriented and focused, as well as sort of creating new opportunities and investments. ROI definition for you is largely going to be the same as everybody else. I've heard patient at the heart of all of these conversations, but maybe you can comment on your mission and vision along the patient track.
You know, what we want to stress is that the Sofinnova Triathlon Fund, even if we have this strategic partnership with a charity, is still an investment fund. So we still need to return to our investors. On the other hand, being a technology transfer fund, we are settled to be patient and to know that investments will take time to return. We are very much interested, as Geoffroy was saying, as Edward was saying, in platforms, because this, again, can help us building up a pipeline and in innovations that in the field of cell and gene therapy are really going to solve existing limits for the benefit of patients. Thinking also that cell and gene therapy somehow started from very rare diseases and needs to find a balance and a proper deployment also for more common diseases, which is the great challenge, I think, in this field we all are going to face. So I think that something that is very important when we look at potential investments is platforms that are able to show higher safety, higher durability, and potentiality to move really from rare to more common diseases, keeping in mind one aspect that is always pricing and reimbursement.
Great. I'm going to come at this question a little bit differently. It's not necessarily in our script, but I'm sure you all have opinions on it. It's how involved are you when you make an investment, either at arm's length or directly into a company, whether for equity or for how involved are you in sort of the management of the organization, and maybe not day-to-day operationally, but in kind of giving the guidance and support and potentially even the network? Just curious how you think of day-to-day interaction with your investments. I'll throw it out to anyone.
I'm right on the extreme end.
Yes,
of that,
yours
so
is pretty straightforward.
I'm involved in everything. Yeah, absolutely, like almost full time. But actually, I mean, the reason for that, so I'm on everybody at Syncona to a greater or lesser degree plays an operating role early on in a company. So we have people that spend, might be involved in getting a business off the ground and then spend maybe 50% of their time for the first 6 months helping to make it operational. I'm on the extreme end. I've been CEO of Resolution basically full time for 2 years now. But the reason for that is, we found companies with academic founders, most of the things we've done, and then we work with them to define the trajectory of the business. We do a lot of work up front on the plan, strategy, and so on, and the path, the development path for the product. It doesn't make sense, having done all that work, to sort of throw it over the fence and give it to someone else. It's very, very important in those early days to make sure that the business is on that trajectory, because it sets the tone really for the direction that the company's going to take long term. So I think it's very important to be involved, especially if you've put the plan together at the beginning. I think the other thing which is so critical is building the team, and so we're very much involved in building the senior team of the businesses that we start. And I'm a great believer that the first few hires into a business, especially the senior hires, they have to be the highest quality, because the standard of the people that you hire from then on will only go down from there. So you have to maintain an incredibly high bar in order to ensure that you maintain a high bar of the people going forward. So I think those are the sort of two reasons I think of for being closely involved.
Yeah, sure. Jordi,
Sure. So we actually cover the full spectrum. So Ysios was founded by biotech entrepreneurs who had sold the company to Roche and then came back to Spain and founded Ysios. But right now, so we focus on Series A. But for instance, the last investment that we made was a company called Therapeutics, phase 2 company, very mature management team. We took an observer role. The company IPO'd. It's actually one of the few IPOs this year, and we stepped off the board. And on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we also do some seed rounds, and in those we are very, very actively involved. So we actually participated, and even in experimental design, building the team, building the infrastructure around the company. So we are actually quite versatile in that regard. So we try to diversify our portfolio and have, from one end to the other.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe shift gears just a little bit and talk about deal sourcing and opportunities in today's climate and the types of things that are either accelerating the attractiveness of the European investment arena and opportunities here, or other factors that you are deliberately looking for in your investments. And Geoffroy, I'll ask you the question, what are you finding is making the EU and potentially UK just a must-win and a must-invest area?
Yeah. I think there is great science in Europe. The talent pool is still limited, but it's growing. As I said, there is money available. Maybe, so these are positive factors for creating companies and making it interesting. And of course, in cell and gene therapies, you have a lot of great opportunities for the patients to really develop breakthrough treatments that really change the life of patients that no other modalities can bring to patients. So it's really interesting to be in this sector. I think what maybe is a bit of a disadvantage in Europe is on the regulatory side, where unless contrary to the FDA, which has a more pragmatic approach and is implementing, a learning process, with really being open and being proactive. And in Europe, it's still there is the intention to do the same, but there is still some conflict between the EU, EMEA, and the local states, which they all want to have some control of this process. So this is this has to change. This has to be more streamlined, so that that would really favor investments in Europe. And then there is reimbursement, which is also driven differently in the US than in Europe. And it ends with lower prices in Europe, so that also would need to be changed to incentivize investments.
Right. So you talk about sort of the three key ingredients. There's patient needs, there is capital on the sidelines, and there's great science. So Lucia, how are you advising, or how are you helping to promote the conversion of science through people to a new company?
One aspect that is really very, very important, given the kind of strategy in which I'm working, that is really finding opportunities in academia, is finding a good match between management and founders, as Edward was saying. And it's not easy, because when you start from an academic opportunity, and you start with a small seed investment, you are also not necessarily so attractive for very solid management. But what we have found, and what we use a lot, is to build a board around the company with very experienced people, starting from the chairperson that can, help also a first-time CEO to grow and to lead the company, and having really very clear and in mind, also when we created the company, both between management and founders, that they need to collaborate and to work together, because none can do that much without the other. And this is really a new way of management. I think that we are creating, all of us, successful stories in Europe from this point of view, and this will be able to put us in a better position also to attract good management and good leaders also from other countries. The other thing that we learned, I think, thanks to COVID, is the fact that you don't necessarily need to have the person full-time on the site where your company is. So a lot of flexibility from this point of view that is also allowing, to have a team with different expertises and different kind of contribution that can strengthen and accelerate the team.
And Jordi, I'll come to you. Great science. What else do you look for in investing?
So, looking at especially the cell and gene therapy space in Europe, I think we've had the great science for many, many years. Europe actually was, I would say almost the cradle of gene therapy. The first in vivo gene therapy to be approved, Glybera, was developed in Europe. The first ex vivo gene therapy Strimvelis came from a hospital in Italy. You had pioneers in France, in the UK as well, the Freeline founders with hemophilia, right? And I think over the last years, what we've seen is that science really become industrialized. I think the big gap that there was between Europe and the US was not necessarily the science, but rather the teams. And when I say teams, I don't just mean management team like the CEO or CSO. It's really the whole, entire value chain, like manufacturing, regulatory, market access. And slowly, I think, in Europe, we've been able to attract those kinds of teams. And so when we look at investments, I think, the science is there, but we need to create the ability to attract those teams, whether it's in Spain or somewhere else or working remotely. Sometimes we have part of the team in the US. But that's, especially in our early stage investments, that's a very, very important focus for us. It's really to be able to attract the team. And again, it's not just management, it's really the entire team of the company.
Oh, great. Ed, you made the comment earlier sort of about the dry powder. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines. People are holding back for investments. How would you set expectations for people in the time to source a deal, get a deal, or raise funds on the behalf of the audience members who are in that position? Any guidance as a scientist, innovator, inventor?
Well, I think, I'm not sure about other people's timeline. I think, we go deep into the science because we really want to understand whether the product's going to work. Can you make it? Especially in our area, cell therapy, gene therapy. Can you make it? You're going to get paid. What's the path to market? We do a lot of work on that, and that's all before making the investment. So it can take 6 months, let's say, from meeting an academic scientist to closing the deal. And actually, it's taken longer than that in some cases. So, and that can be quite frustrating for an academic scientific founder to go through all that process with the sort of uncertainty about whether the deal's ever going to close. And in a sense, I think it's a measure of sort of the partnership that you have with the scientist. In fact, I always sort of think the way people behave before you close the deal probably reflects the best you're going to see out of them once you've done the deal. So, but yeah, it can take a long time and it can take a lot of work, and you always have the possibility that deal's not going to close. And so, but that's the nature of it. I think we are high conviction investors. Once we start a business, we are absolutely in that. We put a lot of capital behind it, and we want to make sure it's right. So yeah, it takes time.
Great. I know in our preamble calls that we were talking quite a bit, not only about the people and the talent that's necessary to make this industry successful, but we also talked about some of the challenges of manufacturing and manufacturability of some of these therapies. I don't know if anybody has any comment on how you've supported or sort of facilitated the guidance and direction on make sure you can make it in the end.
Well, manufacturing is definitely a very important step, and it's important to work with proper CDMOs that I have experience. But then, on the other hand, when you are starting with an early stage biotech company, some of these very well experienced CDMOs are very costly. And again, in these scenarios in which we know that fundraising is becoming more and more complicated, and you need to build a safe runway to arrive to a positive and confirming data. It's always very, very difficult. Having said that, choosing the proper CDMO, I think, is one of the aspects in which experienced and professional VCs can give towards their portfolio companies also some good suggestions and help supporting a proper choice.
No, great. In terms of the conversations you have within your investors or with your investment that you make, how top of mind is manufacturing? Is it still the number one thing or number two thing that you raise, or?
I think manufacturing is critical, obviously, for cell and gene therapies. Is usually one of the main bottlenecks, and I think improvements in manufacturing is one of the key aspects that has allowed these therapies to move forward. I would say, though, it's modality dependent. I would say that 5 years ago you were seeing companies build, for instance, in the AAV space, build their own manufacturing capacity and actually get acquired by pharmas just for that, because they had built that capacity. I think if you draw a parallel to the monoclonal antibody space many years ago, I think we're towards that phase already, at least in the AAV space, where manufacturing is really becoming commoditized, where you can really build your gene therapy company without having to rely on internal manufacturing, because the CDMO providers out there are good enough that you can rely on them to push your internal programs forward. And that also makes it cheaper, for you to be able to create a gene therapy company in that space, something you couldn't do maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, and some of my colleagues and I were talking last night about sort of the difference between CDMO capacity and CDMO capability, and making sure that we're skilling the workforce of today to be able to make sure that not only do we have the place to make a product, but we've got the people who can inform how to make that product. So I'm sure if you have any thoughts on the people and talent development that's taking place in Europe.
No, I would like to just say that manufacturing is a top priority for us when we look at the project, especially in the cell therapy space, where sometimes you have to really be creative in terms of process development. And when we see projects coming from academia, this part is usually not really well addressed. And I'd like to, I've been discussing with some CDMOs here in one-to-one meetings about how they can help on this aspect and be maybe creative in terms of proposal and risk-sharing structures and deals to help, this initial phase of which for us doesn't bring a lot of data points, because it's just investing in production, which doesn't bring you to the next value inflection point. And for investors, investing in production is not very attractive, And in cell and gene therapy, so you need to invest a lot in that before you reach the same data point that you would reach with less money, with small molecules or antibodies. So it would be great, and I think that CDMOs are open to that, to provide support for these projects and be creative and be maybe make different prices for early stage companies, so that they can bring also their expertise, and we can go faster to the clinical data with less money.
Oh, great. Well, it's that time of our session to look forward a little bit. I think I want to be aware of the clock and make sure we do remain. I'll leave some time for questions from the audience. But thinking, looking forward, are there key signals or indicators, whether they're economic shifts or changes, regulatory changes? Again, I'm not trying to lead the witnesses into any topic, but are there any particular indicators that you'd like to see before you really double down and bring, or think that the liquidity in the market's going to improve?
Well, I think inflation going down would be a good sign.
Great.
We cannot predict it, but that would be great. Early M&A deals. Renewal of that would be great, and as I said, regulatory changes in Europe would be also a good sign.
And Ed, you mentioned sort of the improvement in perhaps there were too many assets progressing through the clinic. Looking forward, do you think we've right-sized the industry as a whole? Is there more to do, or are there some deals to be had on the asset side?
I think there's a lot of, coming out of this sort of era of free money, I think there are a lot of sort of derivative companies, I think, with sort of incremental innovation, which I don't think are going to get funded in the current environment. So I think it needs real differentiation now. You have to have a product that is clearly has the potential to be better than everything else, has a good chance to work. So I think, and this is what right, so it's back to sort of the basics of investing, really, and creating a company, but focus on differentiation is really, really important. I'd just like to answer, you mentioned, is there anything we'd like to see change? I think that, in our space, in cell therapy and gene therapy, I think the thing that really, in Europe, we really need to sort out is reimbursement. In the cell therapy world, I think it's particularly an issue because, especially with autologous therapies, where we invest heavily in relationships with treatment centers in doing clinical trials, and those centers become the centers where we launch our products commercially. And in the event that the reimbursement environment in Europe is such that it may be difficult to get paid for our products, and there are decisions to make about whether we even launch in Europe, based with the high cost of goods, let's say. I think there's a threat to the cell therapy environment in Europe in that if you take that to its logical conclusion, we wouldn't run clinical trials in Europe, and frankly, that threatens the whole industry in Europe. So I think there's a piece to really work through on reimbursement there, and whether that, I have some concerns about sort of the sustainability of everything we've built in cell therapy in Europe because of the reimbursement environment.
Yeah, great. Jordi, anything in particular you'd like to see, or are you looking for?
Right. So going back to, availability of capital, and for me, interest rates being the primary driver of availability of capital. So you see some economists like Paul Krugman saying that, we'll eventually go back to an environment of low growth, low interest rates, just because of, slow demographics, aging population, and we'll eventually go back to where we were just 5 years ago. Then you see other experts like Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, who's saying that, inflation is here to stay. So that's going to keep interest rates high for quite some time. As biotech VCs, we actually try to stay away from macro predictions. I think, it's not our core area of expertise. We think they're quite unreliable as well. It's not something you can easily predict because it's based on many factors, some of them geopolitical, the war in Ukraine, things that are completely out of our control. So what we're going to do is, as I said earlier, just adjust to the new situation, right? Go with what we have right now, so which basically means we need to be more capital efficient. That's, I think, a concept that all of us investors in the biotech space, especially in the cell and gene therapy space, are thinking about. Be capital efficient so you can get to meaningful inflection points with the capital you have in hand. That's our primary focus right now.
Okay. And Lucia, as a charitable investor, what would you like to see?
I would share definitely Jordi's position on that. I think that it's very difficult to make prediction. On the other hand, I think that when you have a product that is really innovative and can make a difference for patients, funding should happen and can normally happen. Obviously, it would be interesting also to see in the fundraising an improvement in the valuation. Right now, most of the companies that are out fundraising actually get downvaluated. So at least, showing a bit of recognition for the value added when created would be definitely a very important signal in future fundraising.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. We're about 10 minutes before the end of the session. I will take a moment before we get into the prognostication and advice giving, which is free advice, by the way. We will take any questions from the audience about any of the topics discussed or other topics. And I can't really see you, so if you don't mind waiting for the microphone, and surely somebody has a provocative question. Or maybe they just want to hear about the prognostication in the future. All right, we'll come back to questions, should there be one. Did somebody raise their hand? I don't know. Okay. Oh, Chris.
I'll ask the provocative question, which is, if you're aiming to be a global pharmaceutical company, can you raise your capital on the European stock markets, or will you be forced to go to the NASDAQ in the future?
It's a great question. I'll repeat it for the benefit of the microphone, or if you'd like to say it again, Chris.
Yeah, if we want the ultimate provocative question, if you have a global ambitions to actually build a company, can that be achieved from placement on European stock markets, or do you believe that in the future we will almost inevitably end up going to NASDAQ?
Who wants to touch that third rail?
Well, I mean, you know, we have a number of companies in our portfolio, including Autolus, that have gone public, and they've all gone to the Nasdaq. So.
Maybe the follow-up then, what do you think Europe should do about that? Should we care?
I mean, honestly, I think it's not our industry, right? It's not the life science industry. It's the finance industry. I'm not an expert in that. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. We'll have to have a discussion over a beer or two for that one, I think. It's a great question, though.
I mean, just think, you know, American investors they're innovative, they're risk-taking, they're optimistic. They have all the characteristics we look for in investors in the kind of companies that we build. And I think the characteristics of the stock markets in Europe is different. They're more conservative, less risk-taking. And so we need some of that risk-taking mentality in Europe. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, and institutional investors that are willing to sort of underwrite into the market that they're serving, I think is critical. And for that, you do need a well-educated investor pool to sort of guide and drive that.
Yeah, I was going to make a comment there. I mean, I think to be fair as well, that's where many of the European investors go to invest their money because the money aggregates there. Yep. I asked that question because we regularly get asked the question as well by governments in Europe. So.
And it is a great question. So looking forward then, again, we just have a few minutes left. I would ask each of you to think about what's your outlook? What do you think is going to happen in Europe? We talked about inflation. We talked about interest rates and sort of managing the macroeconomic elements of investing, and the question from the audience about how to raise money on the public markets. But looking forward, if you're optimistic about patient science and the people, what do you think? Where do we go from here? Geoffroy, I'm going to pick on you.
To synthesize what we said already, if you stick to the basics of our industry, which is to provide innovations to the patient and really make a difference for the patient, I believe that these products will be adopted by the market, and then we'll find a way to be resilient during this phase. So I'm very optimistic because our industry has gone over different cycles of crisis on global markets and survived, and because the fundamentals are there. We really depend, our society depends on what we can provide, and more than digital economy, or our health is really more important. And I think people have realized this during the COVID crisis, what it can do to the global economy and how we can affect our lives. So probably I'm very optimistic. We have to be capital efficient as companies, and be focused on having strong business cases for very differentiated products. That's the basic of what we do. So.
In terms of sort of getting the reimbursement, and from an investor's perspective, that ROI on a long-term clinical program, when there's other places to invest capital, so investors are pushing money into parts of the market that they might see a quicker return, how do we balance the sort of the reality of cell and gene therapies? They take time to develop that body of science. At the same time, the effects and the benefits to the patient community that we serve is huge. So how do we sort of message that to not only investors, but also to the community as a whole?
I think it's a matter of really creating a lot of dialogue and collaboration, including also government initiatives. From one point of view, looking at what Wellcome Trust has done with Syncona, is something that a number of different European governments are trying to do. And this should, at a certain point, be able also to balance this huge difference that we have with US. that definitely started much earlier than us, with a different attitude, that's for sure. But it's something that we can compensate. And again, health is a main keyword for everybody, so definitely investments in this field. We'll need to find a way to move forward. But we need to bring at the table all the different expertises to try to find a way to solve sustainability of, for example, cell and gene therapy on the long term.
No, great. And Ed, you talked about your optimistic nature and optimism. Maybe we'll put that in the context of sort of the UK, not versus the EU, but UK and the EU working in perfect harmony together.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, actually, just thinking about the cause for optimism. Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question directly.
That's quite right.
I mean, it's funny how little we remember this at these meetings. The reason we're doing gene and cell therapy is because we're seeing efficacy that we've never seen before, ever, with any other modality. It's incredible. Look at the CAR-T work. The responses we get in the CD19, the B-cell tumors, is incredible. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. And I think when you ask the question about how we balance investment in gene and cell therapy against other opportunities, that's the answer. It's all about the efficacy. If we focus on those things that produce this extreme efficacy, everything's going to work out and be fine. And that's the thing to remember. And I think that's the reason to be optimistic, because science is sort of amazing, and we discover all this stuff which is going to have amazing impact for patients.
Yeah. And at the same time, biology is hard, right? It's hard to get to rein in and in control in any meaningful way. So,
yep.
Jordi, you're optimistic, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm optimistic, especially, same as Ed just said, when there's value for patients, I think we'll figure out reimbursement. I think it's being figured out already for therapies that have that, really outstanding value for patients. I think, the US is always a little bit ahead in these questions regarding, figuring out how to adopt innovative new modalities, really CAR-T, gene therapy, completely new modalities, new systems. But Europe, follows closely behind, and I think it's getting figured out here as well. And then in the end, it's true that, even if a company is European, it is true that their, primary focus is always to launch in the US, just because that's a larger market, right? So, I am very optimistic that will get figured out.
Great. We probably have time for one question from the audience. If not, I'll throw one back to the panel here, but anybody in the audience? You'll all be able to find us at the bar later, I'm sure, so if anything's burning later, please do reach out. So my last question for each of the panelists, thinking as investors and potential investees in the audience, or others, or people who want to become or connected to the investment community, is there one piece of advice you would give to the audience in terms of either raising capital or becoming an investor or whatever that you'd care to share with them? Jordi, I'll go that way and work my way back here.
Right, so for a company that's fundraising, I always, I think, give the same advice. It's important to know what type of investors you're looking for. I think you see here that we have different models, and not every model is good for every company. So that's really important. I think it's important for the company to really do their own due diligence on the investors as well, because they're going to partner with the investors, and they want to know them as well, the same way we do our due diligence on companies. And I think especially these days, I think something that's important is to stay focused, and something that we look at really closely right now is making sure that we're able to, with the round that we're raising, that the company is raising, that making really sure that that round is leading to a very meaningful inflection point. That's something that's really important for us. We don't want to be left in the middle of nowhere, having to fundraise in an uncertain climate. We want to close a round that really covers that value inflection point that will take the company to the next stage.
That's great. We're at time, so maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds each. One piece of advice, Ed?
Well, I got three. I think there's sort of three things we look for in this space. One is think about why your product works. Present in a very concise way why you think your product is going to work. In a patient, I think it's important to address how you're going to make it, because that's probably the biggest source of risk in developing ATMPs. And finally, thinking about how you're going to get paid, which is linked to how you develop it and what is the evidence that you show to show that your product's going to work. Those are the three things.
Perfect. Lucia, advice?
It's definitely are all very valuable advices. The other thing is think when you are a startupper that there is always a time for each role. So just think that when you start up and as a founder a company, you not necessarily need to be present in the company all the way, but you need to step out and find the proper team that will help the company moving forward to success.
The team, great. Geoffroy, the last word for you.
Okay, so you have to show that you have a strongly differentiated product, you have a strong IP, you have clear timelines and budget to reach the milestones, and a management team we can provide. So,
and at the end of the day, build a great company. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to be escorted off the stage shortly, so apologies for running over. Please join me in thanking the panelists. It was a really great discussion, and thank you for being here.